Welcome to another Confluence podcast. My name is Randall Stevens. I've got Evan, as usual, with me, and we have two guests today from a company called Sitelink.ai. So welcome, Adrian and Jesse.
Thank you. Good to be with you today.
I don't know, I'm going to claim a little bit of ignorance because your company is relatively new to me. We both Evan and I spend most of our time in the architecture and engineering side of the world, and you are kind of a little bit downstream into a lot of your customers in the construction and VDC side of the world. So we'll kind of delve into that side of it. But I'll just start this by saying, one of the nice things about doing this podcast is we get introduced to a lot of people like yourself and interesting projects that are going on, and this is a perfect example of that. Sam from Yegatech introduced Adrian and I probably month 6 weeks ago, and we had some nice conversations just talking about technology and where all this fits. So we're glad that you all were able to make it on the podcast.
Yeah, we're excited to be chatting with you guys.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Randall.
Yeah, I know, Adrian, you're out on the West Coast, if I remember correctly, and Jesse was talking. We were talking just before the podcast. You're up in Illinois, just south of Chicago. So, like a lot of companies now, everybody's spread all around the country and collaborating on these things. And Jesse, I think you said you've recently kind of switched hats, but maybe you all can just give a kind of general intro about yourselves, background.
Yeah, sure.
And then let's dive into what Sitelink is up to.
I would say I am well south of Chicago, 2.5 hours south. Unfortunately, I can't just dip in, but so Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, that's where I'm located. And like you said, our team is all around the country. So I'm CEO of Sitelink. We do a location-aware BIM viewer. It runs on mobile devices, iPhone, iPad. And you can get your 3D plans into the field, and it lets you view your plans really intuitively and really rapidly, get answers to questions you have about what you're building. Our team is how big are we now, Adrian? We're
on 7
total
right now.
of 7. Yeah, 7.
Yeah.
Good sign. Stay right there.
Yeah,
Perfect size.
We're pretty engineering heavy,
Yeah.
but we're growing in other areas also. So that's a little bit about our company.
Who is Sitelink for? Before we move, I just want to kind of set this up because you're
Sure.
obviously developing software, but who's your audience for the software? It sounds like it's contractors.
So I'd say the main customer are general contractors, and it gets used, downstream through subcontractors, we are aimed at users in the field, although there's a relationship here between those in the office that are producing the plans,
Sure.
VDC engineers, and the teams in the field that are trying to increasingly get access to them so that they can have more agency. And there's an additional story beyond the BIM viewing where we can also take the context of where you are in the BIM and let you capture issues, photos, and scans all properly located within the coordinated system so that people can understand if there are issues in the field. The main user are people in the field trying to build things.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. All right, continue. Go for it, Adrian. Give us your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a chief operating officer at Sitelink. I've been working with augmented reality specifically for AEC tech since about 2017. And I've kind of seen that story progress from big, high initial investment, hardware dependent stuff on hardware like the Microsoft HoloLens platform to now when we can kind of expect pretty much everybody out on the job site, even if they don't have, a pro Apple device with a LiDAR scanner built in, is at least able to utilize basic AR. Here at Sitelink, I've worn a bunch of hats over the company's history, and these days I'm in the COO seat, which encompasses, a lot of wheel on the bus type stuff, and then also on a small team means I still get to see a lot of customers and users, spend some time on job sites, and support the pipeline delivery side of the product. So as part of that role, I'm kind of the build manager and DevOps side, and help make sure what the engineers are building every week makes it out to the site as fast as possible.
So before we dig into some of the features, I know we're going to talk, kind of focus on some of the new things that you're working on, how that came about, but maybe you can give a little bit of background just about, how the usually companies hopefully are formed because there's a, problem that now there's a solution to solve. But maybe you can give us a little background about how that all came about.
Yep, definitely. I think I'd also be interested to hear Jesse weigh in on this too, because he was previously at another firm working on some of the same problems, and we kind of, each of our firms approached this from a different angle, and then wound up coming together, some of those team members, some of our team members from the previous product, to build what is Sitelink today. So, circa 2017, 2018, I got connected with some folks on the senior management side of large cap commercial construction project out here on the West Coast, and kept hearing this drumbeat of communication challenges affecting job site delivery. That if you drive down and really drill down into the detail, and you look at what's costing projects, and a lot of it's rework, what's causing those issues, and a lot of rework is caused by communication failures, you can see there's a clear story that having the people back in the back office, the managers, even the folks who are on site many days of the week but are on different sites, keeping them in the loop with the folks who are out in the field doing the building, and then vice versa, making sure those folks out in the field have the latest and greatest on the design side. That's a big challenge for this industry. It certainly was then, and then even now today, as more people are bringing digital communication tools out, it's really far from solved right now. And we looked at how can we use augmented reality to enable that, to let somebody out on site capture details about an issue they're seeing with the context of where they are, have them get better access to the 3D BIM plan that doesn't rely on making it back to the trailer, and cracking into the BIM rig that we have in the trailer that lets me actually view the plans for my building. And I know simultaneous to that, at the project Jesse was working on, they were working very hard on that BIM overlay, location-aware access to plans. Well, we were working pretty hard on let me make markup out in the field that lets me see what's going on in context of the site. And so Sitelink kind of brings those two solutions to a common problem together. Now we've got a tool that gives you that real-time, quick access to that BIM model, lets you see it on your screen, lets you see it overlaid onto the real job site environment. But then when you see that issue, or you identify that item that needs to go back to the back office, maybe it's a great thing. Maybe you just did your inspection and everything's all good. You can capture that documentation with the context of the real site, capture it as a scan, capture it as a photo, but make it a part of that project's digital project management story, put it into that BIM model, so whoever needs to see it back at the office has access to it with the context they need.
I know when we talked the other week, Adrian, we were, I was asking about how much just the evolution of in this case, the iPhone hardware, kind of the consumer level, everybody's got one in their pocket, but when is it accurate enough without localizing for y'all to do what you need to do, and or how do you augment that when you get on site in order to get the level of accuracy, and then when did that happen, right? When did all the technology conspire to come together to be able to actually do these kinds of things in reality? No pun intended.
We get that question a lot.
Yeah.
Accuracy is a very big question for people. If I could come back to it though, because there are other aspects of the commodity hardware that I think are definitely were part of the observation we were having, which is that the iPhones in particular, their rendering performance is really pretty incredible. It's not to say you can just take a model designed to run on a gaming rig and just drop it onto an iPhone, but the ceiling for what you can show a user has lifted considerably. And the like Adrian was saying earlier, the availability of those devices is massive, right? So that's one observation. Then you add in the proliferation of LiDAR, and that's another one of these things that previously, you just wouldn't have thought of having on a consumer-grade device. And while certainly not, say, industrial grade, it's still has a lot of information to share, right? And then finally, ARKit, augmented reality, it gives you the ability to track where a user's device is three-dimensionally, with, again, just it's available. It's just on your phone. So all of those things, though, are consumer grade technology, right? They're not meant, they're not designed with the industrial use cases in mind. But the question for us kind of fundamentally is, to what extent does the kind of broad access to that make, really change the game in terms of how we can provide information to users? And the accuracy question, we kind of have to flip it on its head, because the short version of it is that, like, ARKit, for example, on its own is not accurate enough, for example, to like point your phone at something and be like, I'm going to drill the hole here.
Right. You're not manufacturing with that info, right? Yeah.
No. And I personally, I don't really see a future where that is what you do with it. But what you can do with it is change how people interact with their existing plans, right? Mm-hmm. And the kind of exercise I go through is like, how do you currently use your plans, right? Do you print it out world size and try to drill holes with it? Or are you looking at it and trying to understand it relative to other things in your environment? And that's where Sitelink really excels, because what we can do is, so here's a very concrete example, right? We have a user who put drywall up and needs to see what is behind the drywall in a particular stud bay. And I kind of challenged them. I asked, well, why wouldn't you just use like a regular 3D, BIM viewer? You can get that answer by looking at a 3D model on an iPad in a BIM viewer. And their answer is simply like, with Sitelink, you just point your phone up and you look at it and you can see what is behind that stud bay, right? And so that isn't about getting 1-inch accuracy. That's about making it much easier for you to understand the information that is already available to you.
Yeah, you're contextualizing it to the environment that you're standing there in,
Yep, precisely. Yeah.
I have two quick stories I want to share that super fast here. The first one was having a conversation with Nick Cameron at Perkins and Will about accuracy with scanning different, Matterport as an example, with where it's using infrared scanning instead of LiDAR scanning, right? And the question, I think in their terminology, at least back in the day, was like 99% accurate. And somebody will say, well, in 8 feet, that's an inch, right? That adds up. It adds up to a lot. And Nick pushed back. He challenged. He goes, it's more accurate than an intern.
Right.
Nick, and how many times will you have to send the intern to the job site to remeasure or to measure correctly for the third time and take the right photos, right? And so it was like, it's accurate enough. And then I think about the contracting world, right? Like, as an architect, we're drawing really precise stuff. Mm-hmm. Right. It will not get built that precisely for the most part. In most cases, in 98% of the cases, it's not even going to be, the tolerances are much different in the real world than they are in the digital world. And and I know that depends on the project and the technology and all those things. But the funny story is, I was building a pool at my house, and I went out to stake the design on the ground with the pool contractor. And I'm like, okay, this leg of the pool is like 11 foot 4 3/4. And he's like, no. Whole foot increments only. That's what he told me. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, that's all my crew does. And I was like, that was wild. That was an eye-opening experience for me as an architect.
Do you think they have specialized tape measures for that?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I'm like, what are all the other numbers
just
for?
Blank tape measures.
Right.
But I think another way to think about this is that any and all of this technology still does not replace good judgment. People in the situation, aware of what that is, use the information, but there's always human judgment about what
verify. Yeah.
Which I think that's part of a design challenge for us, because I think that, especially, we're not the first company to do BIM overlay, right? Like a camera feed with your plans superimposed on top of it. And as soon as you go there, I do think that there are trust issues, and there are certain expectations that come, that people suddenly have, right? Like, they want it to be 1/8 inch accurate. And I think it's an ongoing area that we're exploring, because obviously, the more accurate, the better. It helps you understand it more deeply. And trust-wise, it just makes you feel comfortable that the system's performing as it should be. But all of those things are interesting design areas for us to explore. Like, if it isn't working well, can we tell you so that you know what to expect? And are there ways for us to convey, that this is not intended to be install accurate. This is intended to be, for you accessing and understanding the documents. And those are, I think, somewhat open questions for us.
I think that
constantly evolving, I would assume. Yeah.
That human judgment side, I think, touches on one of the core values that's come through in this product's feature design, where it, like we mentioned a couple of times, it's not just that BIM viewing capability, but that ability to call in resources from outside your site to capture the current state of the site within the model. Because everybody who's worked on a job has experienced the stories where everybody thought they were making the right judgment call with the available information on their desk or in their trailer, but everybody was missing some key piece of context. And so encouraging folks not to just let the model, not to let the plan do the autopiloting, but to really collaborate with one another with more richer, more accurate context is really a key part of the story.
I know, Adrian, I think you were going to share some, you're working on a new model viewer feature that's part of this. Is that something you can end up showing us what we're describing verbally? It's always easier for everybody to see this.
Yeah. How about I run us through a couple slides of actual overlay Sitelink making that kind of sets the table on what this does right now, and then we can kind of roll it over to you to show what we've got coming up next. So
I like that.
And as I promise everybody on sales calls, I keep my slide decks as fast as possible. So you're not even going to get slide 1. We're on slide 10 here already. We're going to be quick. So we've already belabored all of these points. This is what it does. It's a collaboration tool. You can see that happening right here already. We've pointed out a broken sitting that we're just sharing right within iOS. One of the key values of this platform is not to add more duplicate tool to your workflow. So you're going to see all our sharing goes through the tools we already use to contact one another on site. iMessage is the number one on-site collaboration tool already. Right here, you see we're looking at a BIM model out on a site. This does integrate to Autodesk Construction Cloud, so you can bring those models right in from your ACP project. This is that BIM overlay that I think this is a familiar concept in this business at this point. Choose from your available views, see those views individually or in combination, punch through the walls with X-ray, or see it, the way it would be if it was installed overhead. This is a little more of that. You can see there's that accuracy level Jesse was talking about, where you wouldn't necessarily install these pipes exactly against what's there in the model, but it's close enough that you're very genuinely seeing an accurate representation of reality on site. And over here, we're creating documentation out in the field that then we're able to send and share with other folks on our team however we need to. It can capture a 3D scan while you're doing that, while you're creating that documentation out on the site. Wayfind your way through the job, maybe to even something somebody placed in that viewer off the site themselves. So that's where it's at right now. It allows you to capture this documentation, share it externally, view your plans on the site in overlay. And what I'll let Jesse take it over with here is how that story is now. The requests went beyond, let me see what's on my site right now. Let me see that model overlaid the job to, let me get a BIM viewer that's convenient as that. It's this easy to just see what's in that wall. Let me just see the model for my building with the same ease of use and the same, efficient access to information. And that's where we started working on this standalone model viewer. And when we were preparing to get on this call today, and I thought about telling that story of how a concept for a solution around a problem becomes a solution suitable to the industry, how this feature kind of came together has changed a little bit. And what we're releasing now is going to be a little different from what we'd been originally piloting with our users.
That's a very cool looking app, Adrian. I like that.
Yeah. Try it.
Yeah, so should we share the
go right ahead.
variation thereof?
Yeah, let's show that video.
Unless you guys have any questions about that feature set. I mean, Adrian that's a very quick overview of what's in there.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is how are you doing the location? Is it, because I've seen different ways of doing that, back in the old days with an iPad, and you could scan a QR code or something and it would use that as kind of a location, right. or if you're using GPS, I can't imagine GPS would be accurate enough, especially with all the buildings in the way potentially. So yeah, would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so we use QR codes. So essentially what we have is a web portal where you can tell us where a QR code will be on a job site. And this is an area that we're improving on currently, and I'm excited for where we're going here because, there are two parts to this, right? Basically, setup of these systems is one of the big areas where users get tripped up and then don't make it to the big value, right? And so when we started doing this, we were very aware of wanting the setup to be as easy as possible. And like you said, there are a lot of different options. QR codes can be challenging because you want to have the right QR code in the right place, and then some systems have you like model in a QR code, and you have to have the ID of the QR code in the model, and then make sure that's the right one in the right place on the physical job site. So the way ours works is you put up QR codes, you actually walk around with the phone and scan them in, and we get a 3D location of each of them, and then you can drag and align them into your model, and then you can fine tune from there. It's pretty good. It is one of the faster setups, maybe the fastest setup in the industry, but we're not there yet. Some of the things we're exploring are sort of like a hybrid approach, where we could, for example, let you indicate that this object is an QR code. Sorry. Like it is a QR code, but it doesn't need to be the specific QR code. And then we can potentially automatically align based on some hints you give us. The goal there is to try to loosen the connection between the modeling that you have to do and that on-site setup, and move as much of the setup as possible onto the mobile device so that you don't have as much dependencies on the office to get up and running.
How far off are we, Jesse, from being able to just recognize what's on the site and begin to align to it, right? Like in those videos when you're showing that there's already framing that's going up.
Yeah.
If you knew that, can you begin to, is there a feature where you can just begin to automatically recognize and do automatic alignment?
So I don't want to say, I think we're a ways off from it. I think that job sites are a particularly challenging environment for computer vision. They change at a rate that is really hard for the class of algorithms that are used for doing this sort of thing. So, for example, just built into ARKit, and into the HoloLens and into AR Core, right? All of these AR systems, and actually for that matter, any of your photo reconstruction systems have a way to say, is this a place I've been to before? And then relocalize to that. But it presumes that there's enough commonality between that and the last time you visited it, right? Yeah. And by definition, a job site is changing really rapidly.
You hope so, yeah.
Yeah, right. But like you said, I think it's tantalizing because you also have these plans that are saying this is what is supposed to be there, and then you observe what is there, and theoretically, could we line up to that? I think there's a chance that we can get there. There are a couple of parts to that. One is that like the as-built versus the plans. Right. That's sort of the whole point, is that it isn't always the same, right? So lining up to that may or may not be what you actually want, right? And the other thing I'll say is again, I think more about how to sort of augment a user's existing kind of knowledge. So one thing we've explored, we were actually prototyping this last week. If you tell us, roughly where you are, we should be able to refine the viewpoint to kind of snap you into an even better alignment. So that's where my head's at with that. But I wouldn't say that I'm super bullish on a sort of magical, like, point your camera and we will find what floor, what room, and what stage you're on. I think that feels like a very challenging problem. Yeah, those are good questions. All right, well, with that, how about this feature that we've been working on? So yeah, just some of the features you guys saw, the way I've been kind of describing it by way of metaphor is that we want to be sort of the Google map of BIM. And when we look at BIM overlay, what others have done, there tends to be this sort of, you are either BIM overlay or you're a kind of traditional viewer. And we're looking to explore an interaction that's a lot more fluid and blurs the line into what we call location-aware BIM. And so the idea here is that you should be able to simply pinch and pull out, look at your model, and then hit locate and come back. So here I am. This is not a great example because it's just in my house, but you'll see this is AR mode, traditional AR mode, very roughly aligned. But then I can pinch zoom and pull out, and we can look around just as you would in a traditional BIM viewer. I want to point out that, like, when we talk about the value of location, so like with BIM overlay, you can say, look at that stud wall and understand what's behind it. A view like this, you actually can accomplish a very similar thing where you could take your phone, which is that blue dot, and walk up to the wall and see which section of the wall in your model you're actually pointing your phone at, right?
Nice.
And so the awareness, that like spatial awareness, is really powerful. But now you can just navigate the model like you would traditionally. And then just like Google Maps, you could hit your locate button and it will bring you right back in to your BIM overlay mode. Yeah, that's the feature we wanted to share.
Nice. So you're basically, the analogy is like street view to map view, right? And you're going in, you're coming back out, and that gives you kind of that the two different levels of the map that you can experience.
Yeah, and it's street view is a good analogy. I actually was even just thinking when you're running like GPS for your car, right? Mm-hmm. You have those two modes. One is you're locked onto that blue dot. It's right. Oriented by the compass, right?
Yep.
And you don't even think about it. You just, if you want to go look at something else, you just drag, right?
Yeah.
Right. Those modes are kind of really blended, and that's what we're going for here.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was thinking in terms of,
go ahead.
The design process. That's just what we've gotten to now, and we're now getting ready to release. When we first started thinking about that feature, it was as simple as, and then you'll switch to model view mode, and you won't be localized anymore. You'll be looking around the model, and then you'll hit a button, and you'll come back to AR mode. And I think it was from working with users and from knowing that compass this company has of location-aware BIM was, wait, this really is one mode. You're still out on the site. You're still getting the job done. Why toss out that location context when instead we could make that useful and make a BIM viewer that has some capability nobody else has at the time when we're at it.
So when you're in the overlay mode on site, like in the examples you were showing in the video where you're seeing, piping or conduit or as you would pinch, you would still just be seeing that layer and then you'd have the option to turn on more of the model if you wanted to see it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think as much as possible, those two views will operate as identically as possible. That's another part of it, is just to make sure that there's just one sort of style of interaction. So you want to see multiple, you want to see a different layer. It's the same process you would elsewhere. Yeah. I
feel like filling in the blanks between those two different perspectives is huge from a user experience, because it gives me the contextual awareness that I need to understand what's happening. Whereas how much software do we use nowadays where switching between interfaces, we get no clue what's happening, right? I grew up in the days of the Photoshop in the 90s where it would prepare to save, right? And we had the little progress bar would march, and then it would save, and then we could watch it again, right? And basically you could get up and go get a cup of coffee while it did all that. But at least I knew what it was doing, right? And to me, there's a lot of software nowadays where we just have no idea what it's doing, and it's not giving us any kind of breakdown of expectations, right? And so I think the user experience, by just adding that transition between those two different perspectives is huge. And I think people will just take it for granted, and they won't know why it just makes sense, and they won't know why it's kind of, this is kind of fun. But if it was missing, it would be like, where I just got lost. Where am I? Right? Like, people can't read plans as it is when I'm layman, right? If I'm talking to a client and I'm showing them floor plans, the orientation is very difficult because it's not reality. It's not 3D. It's not the right scale. It's none of those things. And when I put them in a VR environment, right, fully immersive, it's like, okay, now I understand this. If I can get them to put on a headset, right? But there's still kind of these barriers between it. So if I've got this device I'm super familiar with, I'm used to looking at images. If I can hold it up and I see it as an overlay using this magic window of sorts to just see what's going on behind, right there, right on the other side of that sheet of glass, but then I can transition to a dollhouse view and see that happen. I think that is a really big deal.
I think, thanks for saying so. I think, you've hit on something there that, like, when we were first playing with this, I think we have to do a little bit of a gut check where it's like, is this just cool? Like, because it's a fun demo.
Is it just eye candy? Right.
Yeah, exactly. like, whoa, like, that's, neat. But a couple things on the transition that you mentioned, right? So in that video, I actually just play it backwards to transition back in. And the first version of it, you hit the button and it snaps you back to the original view. And though, like, exactly as you said, right, that snapback is jarring, right? Like, the transition back into the camera view is not just cool. It's what your brain needs
get you back
to be able to transit to come along for the ride, right? And so those are things that I think we're exploring with it. And sometimes it's sort of obvious, like, why wouldn't you do it that way? But sometimes we have to build it and then play with it and go like, oh yeah, that's not as good as it could be.
I think for anybody, I was talking to somebody recently, I can't remember who the conversation was with, but it was the conversation was something along the lines of, AR was kind of hot 5 or 6 years ago, which we all know it kind of, the hype cycle, went blah, blah. I recently been renovating a condo myself, and I was using it, right, to start to visualize, and not only for myself, help my wife understand some of the things that thinking and designing in there. I think for people who haven't looked at it in the last 4, 5, 6 years, when the hype cycle, and then they said, oh, that's kind of cool, and kind of, hey, it has gotten really good. I think the AR kit and the ease with which you can now, the scanners, right, if you haven't used any of the scanners to start to, like, for a lot of very useful use cases, it's good enough, like, to use for those kinds of things. So that's why I think it's interesting that on the professional side, the last 5 years of the hardware advances and what's been happening with the AR kit, it's like gotten to that point where it's like, look, this doesn't have to be, sub, tenth of an inch accurate. It's like good enough to start getting the work done. And so I think I just encourage anybody that hasn't taken a look recently, get your phone out, go download one of these apps. There's plenty of them, kind of prosumer, that you can start to do that. Our sister company, ArcVision, has an app called Fovea. I'll give a shout out for their app. You can install it and that's what I was doing, bringing a Revit model in that I was laying some stuff out in Revit, and it's like, boom. It's like, it just magically worked. And Anyway,
Nice.
so just for somebody that doesn't have my head in it every day, like some people do, it was like, wow, this has really gotten approachable, useful.
Yep. Totally. I've done the scanning on my iPhone was definitely kind of revelatory. I had a sort of like an insulation issue. I have a very old house, like pre-1900s, and the bathroom floor was frigid. And I did a polycam scan from the kitchen all the way through the first floor of the house, because that's the shortest path up the stairs, back to the room that's on top of it, which is my bathroom. And, with that, I could see that my bathroom actually overhangs my back deck, right? And that just wasn't obvious to me. Like I'm like, why is that? Why is it like sub-zero temperatures on this floor? I'm like, oh,
Right.
It's basically outside and has no insulation on it. And yeah, those types of tools, to be able to do that with your with the phone that you just use for everything else, is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I haven't personally tried the new Apple Vision Pro headset, but I was talking with somebody just recently that was at the Apple store and got a demo of it, and they said it's absolutely amazing, but there is no way that I would spend that much money. Right, like the use, the novelty's there, but the justification, is like way up there. I think, with what we're talking about, though, it's like not many of us aren't walking around with, one of these devices for a bunch of other reasons. And now all of a sudden you can take advantage of it.
In the construction business, Apple Vision Pro is nothing compared to a construction project,
Maybe.
right? And so I did want to ask, like, are you guys considering developing, because you're developing on iOS, are you also considering developing for Vision OS? Because it seems like, and I'm not a developer, so it's easy, right, to do that. But I could imagine people will be walking job sites if they've been doing it with HoloLenses for a long time, right? And now the Vision Pro is kind of this hybrid device where it's augmented reality and virtual reality, and you can kind of use the crown to dial back and forth. But as an augmented reality device, instead of holding up the piece of glass, it seems like I can just look where I want to look, and I can maybe dial in the BIM model on top of the reality.
I mean, I think Jesse, I'll let you jump in, but I think it's like with ArcVision's tech, they didn't do anything to make that anything special. And basically everything that was developed to run on this just magically works then. So that's the beauty of Apple and that development platform, is all of these become prototyping devices for now that same tech stack to work on the Apple Vision Pro. But I don't know.
So there is a bit more work for us to do. So part of what what makes Sitelink powerful is our ability to take these really massive models and get them running on your phone. And to that end, we have a pretty custom engine. So there is some work we have to get it running. I'd say it's not where our focus is right now, but it's definitely an area of interest. And we're kind of letting, I think, other people try things out. I mean, top of my mind is like questions of safety, and what people's appetites are for pressing that boundary. Like Apple's, official line is don't use this anywhere that it's dangerous. Like just don't, right? I don't think that's going to stop people from trying. And I've talked to people who are absolutely going to try that. And I actually think it's an interesting question, because I don't know that the pass-through is, say, more dangerous than the HoloLens. On the HoloLens, you could put so much holographic data in front of a person's eyes that they couldn't see where they were walking, right? So yes, it's a transparent screen, but I don't know that it was a safe, intuitively safe, right? You had to be very mindful of how much content you were showing at a given time. But with that said, like, you at least couldn't just dial it to 0, right? There wasn't that option. So I think there's some open questions for putting it in the field. My initial thought on the Vision Pro was about, work in the trailer to collab, or even further away, remote access, where we could, say, beam a scan from the job site back in some sort of like 3D video conferencing. You could be talking to them in the context of the real life model. But I had the use cases kind of more office or trailer side. But I mean, I think it is. I want to see what other people do with it, right? I think there's, in some ways, like people do have to push that boundary to just see what it can do.
So it sounds like is the limitation just the how much data you can render and how quickly you can render it? Is that the main limit?
I'm putting my CTO hat on, so I can get a little bit more nitty gritty, right? So our renderer is built on something called SceneKit, and actually I was somewhat surprised when it was released. It requires that it's rendered in RealityKit, which we specifically chose one over the other for performance reasons at the time. And so we would have to port a little more than, as you were saying, like, I think potentially had we built it in RealityKit to begin with, then it might literally have been like move this over, probably make a couple adjustments and hit build.
Yeah. Right.
It is worth noting though, like we intentionally built our whole app in, it's native to iOS. It's not a Unity app. The experience from the ground up has been, we've always had an eye for wanting this to be a really pleasant experience, and that goes from like opening the app, having it launch quickly, to all of the native buttons and all the things people expect in a modern app here. But yeah, so we are set up to be able to port it, but it's just not on our kind of top 10 list.
Well, it just seems like a legit use case where there's a lot of apps out there who are scratching their heads saying, like, we have no idea what we would do. It seems totally obvious with something like this. And the idea of like the remote viewing, I think, is legit as well, because oftentimes, from an architectural office standpoint, we're sending one person to the job site meetings every week, but there's the people who answer the questions are back in the office, right? They're the people with 30, 40 years experience who are working on 20 different projects. And if they can tap into seeing what's happening on site, again, I think that's a really legitimate, if they can see it in reality, in my podcasting air quotes, right? Like that is a game changer versus a grainy dark photo that somebody snapped and sent over email that along with the 50 other emails that came in today. It just seems like there's a way to kind of bridge the gap between the office and the site in a really amazing way there as well.
See, Nick, I would say Nick is going to want to send his intern back to the job site now with one of these headsets on. It's basically his autonomous bot.
Right. I was going to say, we're just going to have to show Evan's firm how much you can do with Sitelink through a FaceTime call, because you could bring a whole lot of staff members out on site in contact that way.
And I think that's another thing that benefits the industry, right? Because not enough people get to go to the site, to visit the site and see, what am I drawing versus what's getting built, and why did it matter, and how could I do it better, and the mentoring and just the kind of the stuff that doesn't happen as much because there's no resources to do that. Or, my region of a firm is getting much larger, so sending people out is getting less and less of an option because we're competing for projects farther and farther away. So it's things like that are all being addressed with technology.
Yeah, and I think to jump on that theme of like commodity hardware getting more and more powerful, the spatial video I think fits into this. So the ability for you to record stereo video and then view it on a platform like this, I think that's really powerful. And again, just the availability of it, right? Like if you want to describe an issue you're having, being able to simply record it or potentially stream it and view it in a headset where you can richly understand the 3D scene. I think those are really good use cases.
Are y'all, your choice of deciding to develop exclusively on the iOS platform, that's interesting, because I would imagine if people are bringing their own devices, you probably have at least half or more on construction sites that are probably Android. But are y'all finding that the GCs and the subs have like dedicated iPads and iOS devices that are there as well? What does that look like?
They do, and there's obviously there are a lot of iOS devices, like you said. People, a lot of GCs will have a dedicated device for this, and we're just a small company, and so I think there was a very intentional decision to say we're going to start with one platform, the platform that we think is going to be best suited to do this, and we're going to try to aim for quality over quantity, right? Because we could have opted to build a Unity app and said like, hey, look, you can run it on HoloLens and iOS and Android, and there was definitely some push to do that. But the way I see it, it's like once we've got really good adoption and we're looking to grow past that adoption, then it'll be a great decision for us to have to make and say like, yeah, let's expand to other platforms. But we just have to decide how to use our resources.
Makes sense. Great.
I have one more topic, maybe mini topic to kind of close us out, and that is just about technology adoption on the construction side. You guys are bridging the gap between design and construction here. Design intent and that being built to the original intent is where these problems occur, right? Like you talked about it in the very beginning about communication problems being the biggest challenge for rework having to happen, right? So I know there's a lot of contractors out there who are looking to minimize the rework, looking to minimize the communication problem. So when it comes to adoption and your story to them, and then maybe the outcome, if you could just talk about that from an industry standpoint, from your perspective of a smaller tech company startup who's solving real problems on the job site and between design and construction, like what's the adoption story been like? What are you seeing? Are you pleased? I mean, I'm sure it could always be better, but working as a digital practice leader in architecture, like technology adoption is so difficult in our industry to get people to modify their tool set, the way they do things, better practices. Technology adoption can lead to a lot of gains, but it takes a lot of dedication to do so. So I'm just curious from your segment of the market, what your experience has been.
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to my mind is basically that you have to, that I think we've put a big focus on really listening carefully and trying to, it doesn't do anyone any good to kind of come at this and go like, look, we've solved all your problems and everything's perfect and you just need to adopt our technology, right? The reality of it is that we're partnering with people to, try to get this tech to a place where it is really valuable for real users. And that means that they experience pain points using our software, and it means that when they do, we try to approach them with a lot of empathy, a lot of curiosity, and that generally people respond really well to that, right? Like if you're coming in really interested in their actual problems, and you're not coming in trying to claim to have solved them without full context, that they're willing to kind of walk that path with you. And it's like you said, it isn't a quick path, right? But these aren't easy problems. And so I think that we are really seeing our software starting to help people do their work, which is what we're trying to do. And it's getting there because people have been very patient with us and willing to try it at various stages of development, provide us really honest feedback, and that we do our best to really incrementally, move it along.
That's a great. Go ahead, Adrian.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's treating technology as another tool. Like it's not this other field that's totally novel to construction. Construction's been applying technology since the Industrial Revolution and even earlier. I think the way we've collectively thought about selling technology kind of changed over the last 10 or 15 years. We've had 20 years, really had a big boom of that in the office side. And bringing it to construction is not the same as bringing it to a traditional office setting. It's much more about augmenting that human in their decision-making, their existing experience out on site with another sharp tool that's going to help them out. And that's that empathetic, that user-driven, that product-led growth story. I think that's the key to success. And it's got to be part of your DNA from the very start. You can't start externally and then come out to the site and say, all right, now to figure out how to make the thing work. You guys all figure out how to make the thing work here.
Yeah, I think I was going to make a comment that, I was a big consumer of the Steve Blank lean, the whole methodology that came about, really in the late 2000s when Steve Blank started espousing it. We try to follow it. It's this whole customer development methodology of like not trying to go, solve this, in a vacuum and then magically bring it to market and think that it's going to be, a great solution for customers' problems. But I still find that even with that mentality from the development side, a lot of times it's hard to find customers who either, say, just let me know when you're done and have it solved, because it does take a lot of back and forth and their willingness to give you their time and input. So maybe you can talk about, how you've identified those kinds of customers, what are good early things to ask them, and how do you get them involved in that process, and understanding that, if you really want this to work, I need your time and expertise to contribute to this process.
It's a big ask. Because and just kind of from a business standpoint, right? I think we have a good product right now, but it's continuing to grow. And, you basically are asking someone like to be a partner, but also ideally pay us, because otherwise we can't keep doing this. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know that there's like a quick, easy answer to that. I know that we've had a good team that has worked hard to just kind of foster personal relationships with people so that ask feels more reasonable, that they have more trust that like we will actually, incrementally deliver on that, so that they're not just sinking their time in and not going to get something out. But yeah, I don't know there's like a shortcut there. I think it is it puts a fair onus on our, on customers. I will say, and Adrian can speak to this too, like, we do work really hard. We don't want users testing our software for quality. We want qualitative feedback. That means that we do put a pretty big emphasis on making sure that by the time it makes it into someone's hands, it works. It may not be the product that they want, it's not to say we'd never ship a bug, but that's an area that we care a lot about, and that we're constantly reflecting on and trying to understand how to do better on, because I think that relationship requires it's a big ask, requires a lot of trust, and we value it so much, and we get a lot out of it beyond the simple, the bill that we may send at the end of the month.
Yeah, I think with some of the larger firms, especially where they go back and forth from doing some in-house development or have people on their team that can do some technology development, those kinds of companies start to understand it. Like, do I want to own these lines of code, or do I want to contribute and have a third party like yourselves own that? But I'd realize it's cheaper for me to spend time and give input. And then I'd rather have you maintain that, and I'll buy the product, but you own the code.
And and we do have, we have strategic partners that are, invested in various ways that kind of bridge that gap, where they have, some stake in the company's general success, but then also, like you say, they just want this functionality. Like they know that they want to have access to BIM in the field, right? And that's not their expertise, building apps, right? So,
I think to both your points, that's where one of the solution providers' roles here is to de-risk that new technology, to make sure that those essential issues that well-oiled software team can identify in advance don't make it out to the site. Something that really took me a while to acclimate to in this industry, how much of a risk adopting a technology is. It's always like every book on sales for tech will go over how, there's the risk side for your customer, but on a job site, that risk can be really expensive really quick. In the worst case scenario, that can be a risk to a human being's health and safety. And so making sure that what you provide is ready for that kind of, here's how it could work better feedback, not it didn't do what it was supposed to, I think is pretty key. That's where you're doing your part as that solution provider by saying, look, we might have solved it the right way yet. This might not be your ideal solution. This might not be the perfect screwdriver, but it's going to turn a screw if you do what we tell you to. It's not going to put a hole in the wall if you press the wrong button or something like that. And I think that's often been a challenge for early stage technology adoption in construction, especially new cutting edge technologies like AR, where we haven't figured out all those pitfalls yet as a tech field. There's still places where we haven't really hammered out all of the potential risks to a development team, making sure that those risks don't make it out to the job site, that they are at least captured on the development side prior to ever being something that can cause an issue out in the field.
Great. Well, I think we're going to want to have you guys back as that feature evolves, right? So I think we've already talked about that maybe over the coming months we could have you guys back on and kind of showing a little more of the behind the scenes development of this and how this is evolving and working in the field. But we definitely appreciate you all coming on and sharing, some of the thinking and process. Like I said, I think I'm interested longer term in like the place where we sit and are doing work with our customers is like, is there something that could be being done with the data that we're helping to form earlier in the process so that downstream it's better suited for the kinds of things that are happening in the field and where's the handoff of the data and those types of things. So for sure, I'm going to want to take a special interest in kind of keeping track of what you are doing on this frame.
Yeah, that sounds great.